Welcome to this session on writing your federal resume. I'm going to, you'll notice that the chat pod is no longer on screen, but I'm going to put it on for just a moment because I'd like to ask you to put in the chat if you are hearing me come through on this microphone. So please put it in the chat if you're hearing me come through today. Excellent. Wonderful. Okay. I'll do another sound check later. Sound gets to be a bit of a tricky issue in this day when, for the most part, things are being done by every organization under the sun online. Especially when you have hundreds of people, as we do have today on this session, the sound can be a little bit tricky. So if you are having any kind of issues, what I recommend that you do is that you exit the session and then you come back in, because that will often fix the situation. Yep, let me just type that in the chat for some of you who may not be hearing me here. And most of you are hearing me, 99% of you are hearing me. Okay. All right. And as I said, I'll do another sound check a little bit later, but we'll go ahead and get started. So thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and join me for learning more about how you can prepare a resume for federal employment. I'd like to formally introduce myself. My name is Carlos Del Toro, and I am with the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, or OPM. And I'm going to be taking you through this information today to give you a better sense of how you can apply for federal jobs and how you can maximize your effectiveness by preparing a resume that is especially tailored or customized to applying for federal work. As you're going to see, it can be quite different than when you're applying for jobs in, let's say, the private sector or even nonprofits. There are certain things that we look for that you really want to take into account when you go into, when you're preparing something specifically to apply for federal work. So I'm going to give you a lot of what I believe is helpful, practical information today. And these are the objectives that we're going to strive for today. I want to really impress upon you the importance of doing an especially great job on your resume, because your resume is going to be your application when you're applying for federal jobs. And I'll go into that a little bit in a little bit greater detail and why I say that in just a little bit. You want to make sure that your resume is more marketable by the time you get out of this session today. And we're going to give plenty of time. We have till 12:15 together. So I'll present around 45 minutes, 50 minutes, and give you all the information. And I really believe it'll be comprehensive for you. And then we'll leave some time towards the end for any questions that you may have about the process. And I'll answer as many of those as I can up to 12:15. Because I want you to really know how to use your federal resume to market yourself to federal employers. And you're going to know how to use the federal job announcement that you see, for example, on USAjobs in order to write a better resume. What sections of the job postings can you use to improve your resume? We'll go through all of that. I'll teach you simple steps to write your experience for better results. And you hear me, when I say simple, I don't mean easy, right? Because it's simple in that it's really not complicated. You hear a lot of horror stories out there about, well, federal employment process this and federal employment process and that, and it's who you know and what. Let's forget all that, right? Today you're gonna see that there's nothing mystical about this process. It can be detailed, right? Because you want to cover certain types of information in order to make sure that you're being effective, but there's nothing mystical about this process. It's actually quite simple. But to get it done in a way that's going to really make you marketable is not necessarily easy. It's going to take some work on your part, right? It's going to take, but like anything else, no cost, no value, right? If you're going to get out of this process as much as you put in, okay? So sometimes you hear about people who are applying for 20, 30 different postings and they never hear anything back. And I'll share some of the reasons why I think that happens, but I don't want that to happen with you, right? So I want our time together to be productive. I'm not just going to read a bunch of slides to you. I want you to get information here that you're going to be able to leave the sound of my voice, go into USA Jobs or go into your Word document, make changes, and have a resume that's going to give you as much chance as anyone else, or even more so, to be able to have an impact when you're applying for federal jobs. Okay. One of the things that we'll talk about also is the USA Jobs Resume Builder. And that is a way within USA Jobs that you could build a resume from scratch if you choose to do it that way, instead of creating your own in something like Word and then importing it into USA Jobs. So we'll talk about all these things, okay? Now, from this point forward, I just wanted to formally introduce myself. It's always nice to know to whom you're listening. But at this point, I want to save a little bit on broadband so that we don't cut into the audio and the like, and we're just going to focus on the screen. So at this time, I'm going to stop my webcam, and I'm going to ask you to just direct your attention to the screen today. Okay. So before I continue, let's just do just one more quick sound check. If you're hearing me, please go ahead and type it in the chat. Let me know if you're hearing the sound of my voice. Wonderful. Wonderful. Okay, and I'll do another sound check a little bit later today. Alrighty, so let's talk about building a federal resume. So why do you even want to worry about a quote unquote federal resume? Well, here's the deal. Is a federal resume some kind of unique animal? Well, yes and no. Resume is a resume, right? However, when you're applying for federal jobs, there are specific things that you want to remember that are going to make this resume process unique in comparison with others, okay? So when you're applying for a job, let's say in the private sector, a lot of times what will happen is you'll use your resume as sort of a calling card, right? You're going to highlight certain things so that you can generate interest. And you go to maybe a job fair, and then you give them, a one-page resume, and then they take a quick look at it. They say, oh yeah, and they invite you, and you come and you talk with them, and then maybe they have you fill out their own application. When you're applying for federal jobs, the important thing to keep in mind is that your resume is your federal application. I want to repeat that, right? Your resume is your federal application. That means that that document is going to be used essentially to make all major employment decisions for you in the beginning, at least in the beginning of this process, from the point of submitting your interest for a job up to the point of an interview. So that means that what happens is you have to make on paper, quote unquote, right? That's electronic these days, but on paper, so to speak, you have to make the business case as to why an agency should hire you as compared to potentially hundreds of other people. And I'm not exaggerating, for federal jobs. You have hundreds of people that can be applying for any one particular posting. So how is your resume going to stand up? Why should they look at you as compared to the hundreds of others who are also applying for that same position? So the way that you prepare that resume, the time that you put into it, the detail, the level of detail and substance that you put into that resume is going to make all the difference in terms of how far you advance in this process. And I promise you that I'm not exaggerating. This is the absolute Okay, folks, it looks like we had a momentary disconnect from Adobe Connect. That happens sometimes. This is what I'm saying, in terms of hundreds of people on a call, you're going to have these situations that arise. So let me make sure. Let me do another sound check. Let me see if you're hearing me. Is everybody hearing me? My back? Awesome. Awesome. Okay, yeah, I apologize for that. There's really nothing I can do about that. That's just the way that Adobe Connect works in this virtual environment with hundreds of people. So hopefully that won't happen again. If it does, just like you just did, just sit tight and we will get through it. I promise. I promise that we'll get through the entire session and we'll be able to get through the Q&A and everything. Okay. All right. Again, if it's very choppy, Alexis, please exit the session and come back in. And same thing, Angelica, with you, because sometimes it's going to be just a problem with the connection because of the lost minute or so. Okay. So let's get back to this. So here's the deal. When you're preparing your resume, you want to show not only that you can provide immediate results, right? Because you want them to know, you want the folks who are doing the hiring to know that you meet all of the qualifications that are listed in the posting. So the resume is going to be your business case, right? Everything on paper needs to show, it needs to convey that you meet the qualifications for the job and that on day one, you can begin working and performing effectively in that position. It's going to be your first and possibly only impression. What do I mean by that? Well, sometimes people will say, well, I don't know if the resume is as good as it can be, but it's good enough to get me to the interview. And then when I get to the interview, I'll really turn on the juice and I'll really be able to explain things better, etc. Here's the deal. You may never make it to the interview if you don't do a good enough job in your resume to show not only that you meet the basic qualifications, but that you meet them over and beyond other people who are also applying. Again, hundreds of whom may also meet the basic qualifications. So you have to do a fantastic job in your resume to the point where you float to the top of a list that goes to the selecting official so that you can have an opportunity at some point to be interviewed, okay? So it's going to be used, in other words, to separate those who are best qualified from those who only meet what's called the basic or the minimum qualifications, okay? So for all these reasons, you want that resume to be top notch. And that means there's going to be some work put into this, and that'll become clearer as we go on. So let me just give you some general writing tips right off the bat, okay? And these tips are in no particular order, but every single one of these is important, okay? So you want to use plain language when you're preparing the resume. Avoid jargon. This is especially true if you're in some kind of a technical field like information technology or one of the other STEM occupations, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. Because a lot of the times you might think that the people who are looking at your resume know exactly what you're talking about, but because you're dealing oftentimes with human resource professionals who are not necessarily familiar with your technical language, even though they might be looking at these types of positions frequently, they're looking at other types of positions too, because they're trying to fill many different types of positions in their organization. So you don't want to assume that the HR person that's looking at your resume knows exactly what you're talking about, right? So if you have something there, for example, and you're looking at and you're an IT person and you have these languages or these different programs, right? And you have Python and C# and all this, right? Don't assume that the other person on the other end knows what that means. I can tell you, I've been in HR for decades. And if I looked at a lot of the IT programs that are out there, unless you tell me what that program does, I don't have a clue. Right. So if you want to show someone that you meet the qualifications of something, but you're putting things in there that are sort of meaningless to the person that's looking at it, then you're doing yourself damage. Right. So you want to make sure that your resume is so clear that a non-specialist can look at that and know exactly what's going on in that resume. Okay. So use plain language, avoid jargon. That goes. That's equally true for acronyms, right? Use them sparingly. I'm not saying don't use them at all because they could simplify our lives, but use them sparingly. For example, my agency is well known throughout the federal government as OPM, the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, OPM. Makes perfect sense in a federal environment, but to someone who's never been part of the federal government, they don't have a clue what that means. So if I'm sending a resume to a private organization, I tell them, okay, I've been working for the past 10 years at OPM. What does that mean? Other people's money? They don't have a clue, right? So I got to tell them. So the first time I mention it, I'm going to say the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, parentheses, OPM. And then anywhere else in the document that I use OPM, they know exactly what I'm speaking of, right? But I at least have to explain it the first time and then put it in parentheses so that they know what it means moving forward. And again, you want to use that you want to use sparingly because you don't want your document to look like alphabet soup. You want it to convey that you meet qualifications and you don't want it to be filled with all kinds of abbreviations and acronyms. So use them sparingly and explain them when necessary. The key thing you want to remember with regard to your resume is that you want to highlight relevant experience and education. I'm gonna call that the R word, relevant, right? Or relevance. I'm going to say that over and over. You're going to hear me speak about relevance in terms of your resume. So when people say, what should I include in my resume? My answer is always going to be the same. Include what is relevant. How far back should I go on the information, on my resume? And you hear that all the time. So let me forestall that question right now, and I'll tell you the answer. Go back as far as you need to in order to tap into the relevant experience. What does that mean? Well, let's say, for example, that you're applying for a human resource position. Maybe you started your career in human resources 20 years ago, and you worked for 5 years in human resources, and you got pretty good at it, and you became a professional HR person. And then after 5 years, you said, I'm pretty tired. I need to move on and do some other stuff. And then you got yourself another degree, or got yourself a certificate, and all of a sudden you start working in the IT field, right? Because you want to work at a help desk, let's say. And then let's say you've been doing that now for the past 15 years. So now you say, 15 years I've been doing this. I want to go back to my roots and I want to do HR. So you go and you start searching on USAjobs and you find an HR position. You say, I can qualify for that. I have 3 years of experience in HR that they're looking for. So what good does the last 15 years in IT do you in applying for that HR job? Not a whole lot. Right? Does it mean it's unimportant? Does it mean that there's no value in that? Of course not. Obviously, there's importance in 15 years. And when you prepare your resume, you're not going to show a 15-year gap, right? You're going to say, I did this for the past 15 years. But the past 15 years, you're going to keep it short, right? But you're going to go back to the 20 years, 5 years previous to that. You're going to go back 20 years to the experience that's going to be what? Relevant, right? Because that's the experience that's going to be qualifying. So if you got to go back 20 years, there's nothing that says you have to go, well, the only experience you could put is within the last 10 years. There's nothing like that in the regulations. You got to go back as far as the experience that will actually qualify you for the job. So it's always about relevance. And with regard to whatever you put in the resume, please understand that what they're looking for is anything that is relevant. If it's something that's not relevant, that's not going to move you forward, either keep it short, like in the example I just gave you, because you don't want to leave gaps, or leave it out altogether. So maybe you have, 10 different courses that you took that have nothing to do with the position for which you're applying. Leave it out. We don't need to see that. We don't need to know that you took, 15 courses in this, that, or the other thing that has nothing to do with the experience to which you're applying. Save that space so that you can use it for things that are relevant to the job at hand. So you want to keep your resume lean and mean, but you want to keep it with enough information to show clearly that you meet the qualifications for the job and that you go above and beyond that, so that you can be even more highly qualified in comparison to other people who only meet the basic qualifications, okay? So I'm hammering on this point and staying here for quite a bit because it's so important. You want to state facts in your resume. Don't exaggerate, right? I know that the tendency is great to try to embellish, right? So, if you've been delivering pizzas, you don't deliver pizzas. You're a food delivery specialist, right? Got it. That's fine. You can be creative, but don't exaggerate to the point that someone doesn't know what's going on, right? So a food delivery specialist might be nice. A food, engineer, right? It's probably not accurate. So make sure that we know exactly what's happening so that there's no question about your qualifications. And whenever you're explaining, and I'm going to have a lot more to say about this later, whenever you're explaining how your experience or about your experience in any job, you want to pay attention to two things. You want to explain what you did, yes, and that's what just about everybody does, okay? But more than that, you want to explain how it made a difference. In other words, did you leave the job better than you found it? And I'm going to have much more to say about that later, because that one bullet there, explaining what you did and how it made a difference, that's what's going to distinguish you from the other 100 people that also apply for that job. Okay, so just make a note of that, mental note, and we'll come back to it. So you're going to clearly show how you meet the knowledge, the skills, the abilities, otherwise known as the KSAs, right? You want to show how you meet the KSAs for the job at a very high level so that you can be considered as above well qualified for this job. Here's some other tips. Again, these are in no particular order. You want to consider creating up to 5 customized resumes, depending on the kind of experience that you have. We have a very widely distributed audience today. Some of you have, maybe you just fresh out of school. Maybe you just got your degree and you have very little experience other than maybe a couple of summer jobs. Some of you have been in the workforce for 20, 30 years and everything in between. So it's really different. It's really a mix. So I don't want to imply that every single one of these tips is going to apply in every single case. If you've just gotten out of school and you only have 1 or 2 summer jobs, you don't need 5 resumes, right? But if you've been in the workforce for 20 years and you've been doing all kinds of different work, you might need different resumes to focus on different skill sets, and take the time to do that, because you don't want to have one master resume that tries to cram 30 years of experience into one resume. It might be a little bit of a challenge to do that. So let me give you a concrete example. Let's say that you are an administrator and you've been working in administration for 20 years. Well, administration, what does that mean? That means a lot of things. It can mean human resources. It can mean purchasing. It can mean budget, right? You might have done all of those things in the course of a 20-year career. So why try to cram everything into one resume? Remember, what you want is clarity. You want the people who are looking at your resume to know without a shadow of a doubt that you meet the knowledge, skills, and abilities, the KSAs for that job. And if they're looking for HR stuff, you don't want them stumbling over budget and purchasing and all other things, right? So what you do is you create 2 or 3 different resumes, each one of which is going to concentrate on that particular field. So in the example I gave you, you might have 3 different resumes. One of them focuses on HR, one focuses on budget, and the other focuses on purchasing. Does it mean you don't mention the other stuff in each of those resumes? No, you mention it all because you're not going to have all kinds of gaps, but you're going to keep the other stuff short. So on the HR resume, budget and purchasing is going to be pretty brief, and then the HR stuff is going to be detailed. So that when you're applying for an HR job, that's the resume that you're going to pull, because that's the one that's going to give detail about your qualifications in HR. See how that works? And then the same will be for each of the other ones. And you just have them ready in USAjobs, where you can store up to 5 resumes, so that you could, when you're applying for a specific position, you can pull the one that you need and use that to apply for that job. Okay. So we'll talk more about that towards the end when we go into the resume builder. But for the moment, just remember, you can customize up to 5 resumes. So you can do them either creating your own. If you look at that 4th bullet, you can create the resumes either from your own files, something you've done in Microsoft Word and you've imported into USAjobs, or you can create it building it within USAjobs using the resume builder. Okay. Here's some things not to include in your resume. Do not include any personally identifiable information. You don't want anything in there that's going to make you a risk for identity theft or any such thing, right? So don't include things like social security number, your driver's license. If the agency needs any of that information later in the process, because let's say you're in serious contention for a job, they'll come to you directly and then you can deal with it at that time. But when you're applying for these jobs, you do not want to put anything that can personally identify you in that way, okay? Same thing with photographs. Do not include any photographs. The only factor that you want HR people and agency folks using in order to determine whether you are qualified for a job is your qualifications, period. You don't want them seeing a picture. You don't want them making decisions, right? Because this is just human nature. You don't want to leave anything else other than whether you meet the knowledge, skills, and abilities. In other words, what we call merit. You want to qualify for a job based on merit. Do you meet the knowledge, skills, and abilities? Can you perform in this job? And that's the only thing that matters, right? And you don't want to even give a hint that something else went into the decision. And you all know of what I speak. So don't include any kind of photographs. Sometimes people want to include copies of their driver's license and all that. There's no need for that. Do not do that, okay? And then the other bullets I've already covered. Last one there. It seems so obvious, it's almost offensive, but I'm going to mention it anyway. Carefully check your spelling and grammar. This is 2021. I don't mean to be cutesy, but I'm telling you, you have grammar checks, you have spell checks. The last thing you want is for someone to be stumbling over misspelled words and things that are out of place that don't need to be out of place. You want people focusing on the only thing that matters, which is, do you meet the qualifications for the job? So make sure you use spell check. Don't be lax with this, right? Check your spelling, check your grammar. Make sure that your thing is picture perfect before you store it there in USAjobs, okay? Because I can assure you that everyone else is going to be looking at those things. All right, so I'm going to sort of jump past this one here, except for a couple of things. This is just showing the difference between resumes that you might submit for federal jobs and in the private sector. The one thing I really want to focus on this page is that first one, how long the resume should be. So let me go into this. Let me open up the chat for just a second, and let me ask you, how long should a resume be? A federal resume be? Go ahead and put it in the chat, if you will. How long? Yeah, we have a lot of good answers in here, and most of the ones that I'm seeing are 2 pages, right? Some people saying 1 page. A lot of people are saying as long as needed. These are our veterans in applying for federal jobs, right? The ones that say as long as needed. So the ones that are saying as long as needed are correct. So here's the deal, okay? Most of the time when you go to any kind of a resume writing workshop, they're usually given by people who are in the private sector or are looking at things from a private sector perspective, and they'll tell you, oh, keep your resume to 1 page, 1 page, 1 page. If you have to, 2 pages, but don't go beyond 2 pages, because then, you're asking for trouble. And that's what most people do. They will try to cram a lifetime worth of experience into 1 or 2 pages. So what you wind up having is these resumes with, 10 short bullets that don't say a whole lot and that don't give a lot of information. That's a bad thing to do when you're applying for federal jobs, because that's not going to help you. So I'll go to job fairs, for example, and people will come up to me and they'll say, oh, that federal stuff, it's all, that's all who you know, and it's all rigged and blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, oh, here we go again. Say, okay, why do you say that? Well, I've been applying for federal jobs like the last 2 years, and I either don't qualify or it goes into a black hole. And I say, okay, can I take a look at your resume? And I take a look at the resume. What is it that I see? Anyone want to guess? Yep. 1 pager, 2 pagers, right? That have 5 bullets, in 14 point, that looks beautiful on the page, looks wonderful, right? It looks very neat and very organized, but it tells you nothing about their background. And then you wonder, okay, is this what kept them out of the running for a particular position? And my thought typically is, I bet that this is what it is. You can't tell anything. You can't tell whether they meet the qualifications. So they're applying for a budget analyst position. They say handle the agency's budget. And I'm thinking, gee, thanks. You would expect that they do that if you're applying for a budget position, but so do the other 500 people have handled agency budgets. Then what, right? What's going to distinguish you from the other 499 people? And that's what's missing, because everyone is told, keep it to 1 page, keep it to 1 page. Or they tell them, hey, look for keywords. Have you heard that one? Some of you have been told that. Well, you got to look for keywords, because in the agencies, they run your thing through a computer, and if you don't have the keywords, then you're going to be screened out. Forget keywords. Forget bullets on a page. You want to put enough information. If you follow my advice today, I believe you're going to have much better results than if you try to sit there thinking woodenly about any kind of keywords. You got to think of buzzwords. Human beings are looking at these resumes. Yeah, it may be true that it's a myth, that whole keyword thing, that there's this master computer system that is screening everything out. Some agencies will use an automated system to do like an initial view to see if people are coming up with some of the all the things that they need to have in there. But human beings are looking at these resumes, which means that they have to have enough detail to make an accurate determination about your qualifications. So if you follow what I'm explaining to you today, you're not going to have to worry about any keywords, and that'll become clearer as we get closer to the last part of my conversation with you here. Okay. But the thing I want you to keep in mind is that you do not have to limit yourself to 1 or 2 pages, okay? Now, please hear what I'm not saying. I am not telling you, giving you permission to go and do a 20-page resume, right? You don't want to write it, and I promise you that the agencies do not want to read it, right? It's just too much. So I'm not saying that, oh, you have unlimited, right? You just go and do it unlimited and, throw caution to the wind. No. What I'm saying is take as much space as you need to accurately show that you meet the qualifications of the job at a very high level. That might take you 3 pages, 4 pages, 5 pages. If it takes you that much, do not feel strange doing that. Go for it, right? So try to be as brief as you need to be, but take enough space to make sure that you're conveying adequately your qualifications for the job without worrying about going over 1 or 2 pages. You're going to go over one. When I show you later what I'm going to show you, you're going to go over 1 or 2 pages if you have any amount of experience, length of time of experience. You're going to do it, and it's going to be to your benefit, right? The only caveat I give to all this is if the agency says in the job posting, do not give me more than 5 or 6 pages, if they specify a number, believe them. Okay, because if you don't and you give them, if they say don't give me more than 6 pages and you give them 7, they will screen your application out. Okay, now that's going to be, in my experience, that's going to be the exception rather than the rule. Most agencies will not specify a page count, but if they do, stick to that page count. Okay, so I'm making that very clear. But for anything else, take what you need, 4, 5, 6 pages, but make it count. Okay, because it's going to help you. Now, the other things that are on this slide are pretty straightforward. And by the way, you don't have to take notes on this unless you want to, because I'm going to make these slides available to you after I've done with my talk. Okay, there are 2 general formats in which you'll find resumes these days: the functional resume or the reverse chronological. Functional is kind of listing everything in one section that pertains to a particular function. So for example, going back to the example of HR, if you've been doing HR work, you put down everything I've done in HR, regardless of what organization, what agency, everything's in one spot. Okay, here's all the HR stuff that I did. Then here's all the budget stuff I did, etc. The problem with that is that it can get very confusing for people in the agencies to piece that together in terms of the amount of time that you were doing those things, because we're looking for a year, 2 years, 3 years, and sometimes it's hard to put that together from a functional resume. So I recommend that you pay attention to the reverse chronological format. That is the way that you typically are probably familiar with, where here's my most recent job, and then you work your way backwards, right? So, this job from 2018 to present, and then this job from 2016 to 2018, etc. Okay, because that way you could see, 6 months here, a year and 2 months there, etc. So list your most recent experience first, work your way backwards, and as I said this earlier, but I'll repeat it: go back as far as you have to. So they say, well, how far should I go back? 10 years, 20 years? Go back as far as you have to tap into the relevant experience. Okay. And by the way, you can prepare your resume however you want. You could do it functional, you could do it reverse chronological. There is nothing in law or regulation that says it has to be reverse chronological. But I'm just saying that based on experience and how HR folks review these, the reverse chronological seems to be the best way to convey what you're trying to convey. Does volunteer experience count? The answer is it depends, right? Is it relevant to the job for which you're applying? If it's relevant, then it absolutely counts. Once again, there's nothing in law or there's nothing in law or regulation that says that it must be paid experience, right? There's nothing more professional about paid experience as compared to volunteer experience. Your volunteer experience, what counts is, do you meet the knowledge, skills, and abilities? Do you have the skill sets that are necessary for this job, right? That is what's going to count. So for example, let's say you're applying for something and one of the KSAs is the ability to work with teams. Well, maybe in your current job, maybe you've never worked on a team. Maybe you do all your work by yourself, and you just, interconnecting with anyone else is just incidental to the job. But what about stuff you've done on your own personally? What about if have you been part of a team with your church or your synagogue or your mosque? Have you, were you the secretary of your, of the board somewhere where you had to work with a team? And it's volunteer experience. It's not your quote unquote professional job, but it gave you the kind of experience that you needed in order to meet the knowledge, skills, and abilities for the job for which you're applying. So you can absolutely include that. All right. So that's important to understand. Okay, these next 2 slides are just, and you can look at them later when you get the slides. It's just telling you why we're insisting on some of this stuff, because human resources and selecting officials want to see certain things on the resume. And if you prepare the resume in the way in which I'm describing it, you're going to be able to convey those things to HR folks and hiring officials. Okay, so, and the next 2 slides, similarly, I'm going to tell you all the ineffective stuff, and then the opposite is true, right? So if that's ineffective, this is what makes it effective. So, ineffective federal resumes. I'll tell you what, let's do it the other way around. Let's tell you what the effective ones do. So the effective federal resumes, and some of this is a little repetitious, but it bears repeating. They are sufficient in length to show that you meet the qualifications. Okay. So if you're looking at these resumes and you see that you have a one pager and you're not really giving enough information in order for them to make an adequate determination about the job, then it's too short, right? You have that mentality where you're trying to stick to 1 page, 2 pages, and you're going to sell yourself short, right? So you want to make sure that it's sufficient in length to show the qualifications for the job. To be effective, you want to show the specific relevant experience, right? So, and I keep hammering on that, right? But that's so important, that make sure that the experience in there counts. You want to clearly show not only what you did, but you want to show the results and accomplishments. And this kind of goes back to what I said earlier. Remember, I talked about that one bullet that said not only what you did, but how it made a difference. That's what I'm talking about, right? Because maybe a bunch of people did the same thing, but they didn't do it as well as you did, right? So I'll show you some examples of that a little bit later today, because that's what's going to make all the difference. That's what's going to give you higher scores on things, right? When they're looking at when they're trying to categorize you. Show how what you did and how it made it better. You want to show that you meet the possession of the KSAs. Leave no doubt that you meet those KSAs. You want to be flawless with regard to spelling and grammar. Make sure it's clean. Same thing, remember, with the acronyms. Avoid jargon. In other words, provide agencies the necessary information that they need in order to qualify you for the job without a shadow of a doubt. And also, there's one other thing that's important, and that is, if you prepare a really good, well-prepared resume, it's going to support your answers on what's called the occupational questionnaire. When you're applying for federal jobs, more often than not, it's not always going to be the case, but more often than not, you're going to have part of the application process is something, and many of you who have applied for jobs before have seen this already and experienced it. You're going to have what's called an occupational questionnaire. That occupational questionnaire is going to measure the degree to which you possess different KSAs. You're going to use the information on your resume to support your answers on that occupational questionnaire. So it's going to be important to be able to support those answers. More on that in just a little bit. Okay, so this is all work, right? Before I go into the slide, let me do one more final sound check here. How's that sound coming through? Still coming through okay? Go ahead and type it in the chat, if you will. How's that sound coming through? Excellent. Excellent. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so this is work, right? This is not slapping together 5 bullets on a resume and then you're done. This is preparing a full-blown document that's going to make, like I said, your business case. Because remember, you're not going to be talking to these folks right off the bat. You have to, in a sea of 200 or 300 other people, you're going to be trying to make the business case as to why they should look at yours on a higher level than everyone else's. So this is going to be some work, but you know what? It's work well spent. It's time and effort well spent, because it's going to give you a resume that's so much better than some of the typical things that you see out there. These one-pagers that don't tell you anything, and that will get you, shortchanged and screened out pretty quickly. Right? So how do you prepare this? Well, there are different ways you can get the language to fill out this resume, right? One of them is former job descriptions in different organizations in which you've worked. You might have language in there that will help you to describe what it is that you do and that you have done. And then you can weave that language into your resume. You might have supervisory reviews, in other words, performance evaluations. I don't know about you, but in my agency, and in previous organizations, even outside of the federal government, the private sector, when a supervisor gives you a very high rating, they can't just say, oh yeah, let's give this person an outstanding or above successful or whatever. They got to justify it, right? They got to give information about why did you feel, that this person merits that kind of a high rating. So they're going to include language in there about, hey, this person was expected to do this, but they did 3 times better than that, right? So we were expecting them every month to do 500 widgets and they did 1,500 every month, right? You're going to have that kind of language in there. So you can pull that language directly into your resume so that you can show proof, evidence, and it's going to make the resume stand out that much more. Same thing with course feedback that you might have gotten, or military honors, right? Awards and recognition. Notice that. I want to tell you what happens with awards and recognition when people are applying for federal jobs. If you're familiar at all with USAjobs, and by the way, you can attend, and I would highly recommend that you attend one of the Navigating USAjobs webinars that's similar to this one. And you can sign up for that through USAjobs like you did for this one. I would recommend that you take that and get more information on things like this. But what'll happen is when you're applying for federal jobs, you're going to submit your resume always because that's your main application. But then you're also going to submit supporting documentation, right? And that supporting documentation may include a cover letter, which is, by the way, always optional, never required. You might include copies of your transcripts if you're trying to, your school transcripts, if you're trying to qualify based on education, right? And there are other things that you can include. And you can include up to 10 different supporting documents. But you know what a lot of people do? A lot of people will use those 10 documents. They'll take 5 copies of certificates, like they got a customer service award or they got a spot award, and they'll make a copy of the certificate and they'll include that as as one of their supporting documents. And you know what? It's not that there's no value in that, but the problem is that it's sort of useless. And I'm telling you from the perspective of someone in the past who has actually reviewed qualifications and done that on an operational level. That was of very little value to me. And it's not that there's nothing intrinsically right about that, right? It's great that you got the award, but it doesn't tell the HR person anything. It doesn't give them context, right? So it's pretty useless. It's a waste of 5 spaces in those documents. I'll tell you what's more useful and what will be more helpful to you. Instead of submitting a copy of a customer service award, include a statement within the resume that tells why you got that award and how it made a difference. I received a customer service award in July 2019 because I was considered the best trainer out of 15 in the agency. That tells me something. That gives me context, right? And that's what's going to be factored in when someone is reviewing your qualifications, and they're going to look at that and they're going to say, and they're going to see, okay, this is why this person got this at a very high level. That gives you context as compared to looking at a certificate that says, they got a customer service award. That's nice. And then they kind of move on, right? So always qualify, give context with awards and recognition. Same thing with customer acknowledgments. Did you get a nice letter from someone that really went out of their way to tell you, hey, the customer service you gave me was like the best. I've been coming to this place for 15 years and I never was treated as good as you treated me. And they tell you why. See, that's the kind of information that you want to get in there, because that's the kind of information that's going to make the difference in terms of those KSAs. Same thing with survey results, right? So when you prepare to write your resume, gather these types of documents and bring those things in together, and it's going to make your resume that much better. When you're preparing a resume, think outside the box, right? So I kind of alluded to this when I was talking about volunteer experiences before. Let's say that one of the KSAs has to do with leadership. Well, maybe you don't have much chance in your professional jobs to be a leader. But what about your social organizations and your civic organizations? Maybe you were the president of whatever, or in your community, right? Maybe you were on the board, the municipal board or something, right? Well, that counts. That's giving you leadership, right? And on and on. So if you look at this list, all these different things, projects that you worked on, students, many among the hundreds of people we have here today are students. And you say, well, how can I distinguish myself from other students who are just coming out of college? Well, what kind of projects did you work on when you were in school? Did you work on a thesis paper on which you were the team lead and you had to coordinate everything and you had to pull everything together? Did you work on a special project? Were you part of a foreign exchange program where you had to go and work on some things, overseas, or, anything that you can do to distinguish yourself from other people around you is going to be beneficial to you. Did you have special assignments that other people did not do? Those are the kind of things you want to bring into this process so that you can make yourself stand out. Okay. How do you use the job announcement, the posting on USAjobs, to help you to do a better resume? Well, when you look at the job announcements, they're all set up pretty much the same way. These 3 sections are going to help you to get clues as to how you can better your resume. The duty section, where you have the responsibilities that are listed for the job, the qualifications section, and I already mentioned and referenced the occupational questionnaire. Let's take a quick look at each of those in turn, and then we'll get to the real heart of this presentation. So the job announcements have all this basic information, right? The overview, location, etc. And then if you look across the top, see if I can grab my pointer here, you notice the menu items, right? Locations, duties, requirements. And if you keep scrolling down in this announcement in a live environment, you'll see all these sections. But you can go straight to those sections if you want. So you can go straight to the duties section by hitting duties, to the requirements by going to the requirements section, etc. Okay? So if you go to the duties section, it's going to tell you exactly that. The different responsibilities and things you're going to be expected to perform. So notice, remember I said before to forget about looking for buzzwords and keywords and key terms. This is your key terms, right? When you're looking at your duties and responsibilities and all the things in the next 3 sections that I'm going to mention, if you weave this language into your resume, it's going to be that much better, and you're going to cover way beyond any supposed key terms or buzz terms, right? So at the full performance level, responsibility is going to include things like performing research, in this example, identifying review findings and trends, researching and reviewing laws, identifying legislative and procedural requirements. If you've actually done these types of things or something similar to it, this is the language that you want to weave into your resume, because that's what's going to help you to hone in on what's important for this job, so that someone who's reviewing this in HR says, oh yeah, I see where they performed research in their previous job. I see where they identified regulatory and procedural requirements. It's not exactly what they do here, but it's comparable, right? And that's the kind of language that you want to bring into your resume and weave into your resume. Same thing in the qualifications section. So you see this section here for this GS7 auditor, you have to have a year of experience doing what? So specialized experience. Specialized experience means experience in that particular field or similar, doing similar work. And it gives you examples, right? Verifying reports against source accounts, performing routine technical accounting assignments, verifying cash receipts and disbursement vouchers, verifying accuracy of computations. So if you've done this kind of work or something similar to it, this is the kind of language that you want to use, because it's going to speak directly to this, right? And it's going to show, oh yeah, this person has done this thing before. Because what's the best indication of whether you could do something in the future? Well, whether you've done it in the past, right? So if you can show that you've done similar things and weave this sort of language into your resume is going to be that much better. And it's going to show, oh yeah, this person can do this job on day 1. The occupational questionnaire, usually within the body of the announcement, you'll be able to preview those questions even before you decide to apply. So to preview the questions, use the link and it'll take you to the occupational questionnaire. And as I said, the occupational questionnaire is sort of a multiple choice self-assessment that you will use to show the degree to which you meet the knowledge, skills, and abilities for the job. So here's an example, a sample question for that auditor. Which of the following best describes your experience verifying the accuracy of computations? And the choices will be everything from I haven't done this at all to I am an expert on this, right? And people regularly consult me and I've trained people, etc. And then everything in between. And within this example is not perhaps the best, but within the occupational questionnaire, you're going to have language in here that's going to describe what it means to meet this particular item, right? What does it means to verify the accuracy of computations? So if you've done this at an expert level, then you can use this language, right? Now you don't want to parrot it word for word necessarily, but you could say, look, I was so good at this that in verifying the accuracy of computations, I used to train people. I created a whole training course on this and use that language. So when they're looking at this, they say, oh yeah, that's where it is. I see it right there in the resume. And it matches to this high level on the occupational questionnaire. You see how that works? So you want to use the information, the clues, right, within the body of the resume, within the body of the job announcement itself and the occupational questionnaire in order to improve your resume. And that's that's how you're going to really beef it up. Now, you're going to have, you want to make sure you read through the entire announcement, that you look at the required documents, that you include everything that you need to, like I said, all the supporting documents. And then when it comes time to write your experience, so kind of here's the heart of all this and how you present this information on the resume. You want to write it this way. You want to show not only how much experience you had, but the level of the experience and why it mattered, right? What you did and how it mattered. That goes back to the very beginning of the presentation, right? What you did and how it mattered. So most people, if you look at that first thing that you see here, most people will say with the bullets, right, on the one-page resume, I managed a team. Well, that's nice, but it doesn't tell you anything. But manage an 8-person team over 15 years. Now we're getting somewhere, right? Because it shows you scope, breadth. I didn't manage 1 person. I didn't manage 3 people. I managed 8 people. And by the way, I didn't do it for 6 months. I did it for 15 years. That tells you something. And by the way, I routinely advise and brief senior executives. I wasn't just talking to, the clerks in the organization. I was teaching senior executives, right? And then why did it even matter? Well, the accomplishments are going to show why you should be selected as compared to others. In other words, why did it make a difference that you did this? Okay, so you managed this team. It's great. 8-person team, 15 years. But why did this matter? Well, it mattered because, and you write in there, because this team became the best, the crack team on, the crack shot team on doing, purchasing or whatever it was, right? And it helped the agency to advance or whatever it might have been. These are some questions, as a matter of fact, that you can look at when you're trying to decide how to write this out. Who was impacted, right? Were there cost savings? How much? Did you exceed deadlines? By how much? You were supposed to do things in 2 weeks and you got it done in a week routinely. That tells you something. We already covered awards or recognition. In other words, ask yourself what changed or improved as a result of me doing this job. Right? It was said of one of the Caesars that he found Rome brick and he left it marble. Right? So what did you do in your jobs? What did you find brick and by the time you left it was marble? Did you leave the job better than you found it? And quantify wherever possible. 8 people, scope of 15 years. I did 20% more, right? Anywhere you can quantify is going to help to really improve that. Here's a solid example of a before. This is a trainer, person who does training, responsible for planning, executing, and coordinating special operations, mountain and desert training. Served as primary instructor for all new soldiers in training. Actually, in my experience, that's actually pretty good. Because most people will give a bullet, right, with 5 words, and they'll say, served as, primary instructor. Well, that's okay, but it doesn't give you a whole lot, right? So much better. Primary instructor for all new soldiers, planned, executed, coordinated. That's actually not too bad. But look how much better it is when you put a little bit more work into it. Developed and executed numerous sensitive and realistic training courses for nearly 1,500 personnel annually. Can you see it? Can you see the picture in your mind? Rated as the #1 instructor over 20 peers on the last 3 annual performance reports. You see how that comes alive? Same thing, same person, same position, but one of them gives you so much more, right? And that's the kind of stuff that's going to take you over the top as compared to other people. Okay, so I really want you to notice that. So taking this to your posting, your job posting, quick process on how you can work this out, how to write your experience. So review the job opportunity announcement, that's the posting. Make sure you understand the requirements and the description of the work to be done. Break the requirements down so that it's easy for you to work with. Short statements, bullets. This is for your worksheet, right? This is not the final product. Right? I'm not telling you to put down bullets for your final product. I'm saying break it down, and I'll show that to you visually in a couple of minutes. Then compare what you've done in the past with the requirements, find the similarities, and then write out your experience to match your personal experiences and accomplishments with the language and the requirements. Okay, so this is how it works in practice. Remember that one we saw before, the GS7? So you want to understand the requirements, step 1. So they're looking for specialized experience, meaning which is experience doing that type of work, where you're doing a year, or you're doing verifying reports against source accounts, performing routine technical assignments, reconciling bank and other accounts, verifying cash receipts, etc. But it may be a little bit tough to kind of work with this in this big narrative paragraph. So just break it down. This is when I say the bullets for you. Break it down. So now you've just taken the same thing, right? And you've put this together, and you've put in some bullets together, right? Verification of reports, perform routine technical accounting, etc. And then you take each one of these to the extent that you can, and you flesh it out based on stuff you've actually done. So this is what it might look like for the first bullet. So for verification of reports against source accounts, you annually verified over 500 source reports and identified weak internal controls and accounting procedures. And not only that, but you created a new standard operating procedure that resulted in a 10% decrease in errors and $52,000 in labor savings. Whoa. Do you see how much better that is than verified reports? So you've fleshed that out. You've given, you've quantified wherever possible. You've made this really solid. And now, can you imagine doing that for every single one of these bullet points, or the vast majority of them? By the time you're done, you have experience and accomplishment for every single point. Now, can you see why trying to keep a resume to one page is sort of folly, right? Because you're trying to cram all your experience into a few bullets on a single page that tell you nothing. So doing something like this for every job that you've had, 3 or 4 jobs that you had, you might very well wind up going 3 to 5 pages, right? But you're going to have 3 to 5 pages of solid substance that's going to tell them why they should hire you as compared to everyone else, right? This is how you get to the top, my friends. This is how you do a resume when you're applying for federal jobs that excels, right? Forget keywords and buzz terms. Do this, and it's going to take you much further, I promise. So some last minute things, and I'll open it up to questions, right? Some people ask, do I do a resume summary? Well, if you're going to summarize, it's optional, at the top. This is what I want, what I'm looking for, and the objective, right? I find those of limited value, but if you're going to do it, actually summarize something. Do the whole resume first, and then do a paragraph that's meaningful that will summarize it, and paint the word picture of the highlights that are going to help you stand out. People ask all the time, do I need to do a cover letter? Okay, so the short answer is no, you do not need to do a cover letter. Can a cover letter be helpful? Sure. It's optional. But if you use it, don't just use it to regurgitate stuff that you already have in the resume, right? Highlight specific types of experience that seem to be very important for the job, and use compelling language so that you can really draw attention, right? One of the really good uses of a cover letter is if you're trying to apply for the type of, there are some what are called non-competitive appointment authorities that you can be considered in ways above and beyond the folks who are normally applying without qualifying for those non-competitive ones. Example, if you're applying for something based on prior experience in the Peace Corps, or if you're applying for something because you are an individual with a certain type of disability and you might qualify under a special hiring authority known as Schedule A, okay, you can also include that and say, hey, I'd like to be considered under the Schedule A hiring authority in addition to the standard way. And then you could say my proof of disability letter is included as part of this package, or something to that effect, and then it draws attention to that, so that you can then draw attention to special hiring authorities. So there are good uses for cover letters, but they're always optional. Your resume will always be mandatory because it is your application. Okay, if you're a veteran, similar things as I was saying before, try to avoid jargon, right? Compare your military skill sets with comparable civilian position duties so that you can apply for things that maybe match your military occupational specialty, and consider these special hiring authorities for veterans. And I won't spend a lot of time on this because you'll have these slides later. Same thing for the other special hiring authorities. I mentioned a few of them here, and I mentioned a few in my example. You can take a look at these a little bit later. Last thing I want to mention before we go to questions is the resume builder. So if you go into USAjobs, if you're on your profile, in the documents section, you're going to be able to do your resume or your supporting documents. And as I said, for resumes, you can include up to 5, and you can build that with the resume builder. So this plus sign here will allow you to either build a new one within the resume builder, or upload one that you've already done. So if you're going to upload one, you just select the arrow, you go to your file on your computer where you have the resume, pull it in, and you're ready to go. If you're going to build it, you select the wrench, and then it's going to take you through the process step by step. You're going to name it, and then you're going to start adding each section: work experience, etc. Okay, education, until you get through it. And I recommend that you go through the builder at least once, even if you wind up not saving it, because it's going to tell you the kinds of information that are needed in order for your resume to be complete. All right. So here's a good example, and it's a little bit hard to see here, but sometimes people will put on the resume, I did this job from 2000 to 2002. Not enough information. Not enough information. You're going to get shortchanged. Why? Because if you look at the qualifications before, it said 2 years of specialized experience or something like that, right? Or 1 year of specialized experience. So let's say in this example, you need 2 years. Well, there it is, 2000 to 2002. Not so fast. Was that January 2000 to January 2002, or was that December 2000 to January 2002? See, that's a difference of almost a year. And I guarantee you that the HR person, if they know what they're doing, they're not going to give you a credit for a full 2 years. They're going to look at that and they're going to say, this is vague. I cannot give this person full credit because they don't know. Because if they wind up hiring you and you said you had 2 years, that you had the required 2 years of experience, and then they go and verify it, and everything will be verified at some point. Everything you put on your resume will be verified. So if they go back later and they say, oh, this person doesn't have 2 years, they have a year and, a year and 5 months, then you're now technically in an illegal appointment because you don't meet the qualifications. So they don't say, well, it's our mistake, so next time we'll catch it. No. What'll happen? Two things will happen. The HR person will get in trouble because they didn't do their job, and you will lose your job because they will have no choice but to terminate you because you cannot be appointed into a position for which you do not qualify. See, a lot of people complain because of the length of the civil service process, and understandably so. It can be lengthy, but there's a lot of things that we're looking for, and one of them is that all these things have to be verified because we want to make sure that everyone who's in these jobs actually meets the qualifications. And that's one of the things that can happen. So that's why we're such a stickler about things. So the point is, go through the resume builder at least once to make sure that the same kinds of information are included in your Microsoft Word resume so that you can get adequate credit for the job. Okay, so go through all those sections here, and then once you're done, then you have a new resume within the builder. Okay, all right, so there's a lot of information thrown at you once. We still have about 15 minutes for questions, which is typical. So if in a second we're going to go to the question answer page, but if for whatever reason your question is not answered today, or if you have things that come up later, you can always reach out to us at outreach@opm.gov. It's easy to remember, outreach@opm.gov. And you can send your questions there. You can reference this session on writing your federal resume on 318, and they'll get your question over to me. Okay, so I'm going to take you over to the Q&A page, and you could start typing in your questions in the upper left-hand corner. On the right-hand side, you're going to see a series of evaluation questions to give us feedback for this session, and I ask that you please give us feedback, including in the free response section. And in the lower left, you're going to see the files pod where you can download the slides for today. So you could just select that slide and then do download file, and you can pull it right into your computer. If for whatever reason you can't pull it up, you can always send an email to outreach@opm.gov, and we can send that out to you. Okay. All right. So at this time, I welcome your questions, and then you can do the other stuff as well. My resume includes my dates of college graduation, which easily indicates my age, which is personal information. Any recommendations? There's really not much that you can do with that, to be honest, because if you're trying to qualify based on education, you need to be able to indicate that you have the required educational elements, right? Whether it's a degree or certain amount of credits or whatever. I would sort of challenge though whether it easily indicates your age, because remember that we have students of all ages that go to college, right? You have non-traditional, what are considered non-traditional students that are maybe starting a second or even third career, people that'll go back to college at age 50 because they want to start a brand new career. And that doesn't necessarily indicate their age, right? So I would challenge that. But yeah, if you're going to qualify based on education, you're not giving the specifics of the dates necessarily, but as far as your age, but you are going to need that in order to prove that you have that education. So that's a good question. I've never seen that question before. It's very interesting. If I have been 3 grades in the same series, should I add those as separate entries in a federal resume? For example, GS9 promoted to GS11 and GS12. Okay, so what this person is referring to is, we have what are called career ladders in the federal government. You could start out as a GS9, and then every year you could be promoted if there's a career ladder, a year later from the 9 to the 11, a year later from the 11 to the 12. So she's asking, do I list each one of those separately? You could list them separately briefly, but you could also say GS9 with career ladder to GS12 or something like that. And then you could say, GS9 parentheses, whatever year you were hired, and then GS12 parentheses, whatever other year. Let's see. I'm going to jump around because there are more questions coming in than I'm sure we'll be able to answer. So I want to try to find ones that are common to everybody here. How should I highlight my education? I put my degrees at the top. Remember, there's no set format. So people will do it differently. Some people will put experience first and then education. Some people put education at the top and then down below the experience. It really doesn't matter. 6 of one, half dozen of the other, right? So it's really your preference. it's all going to be checked because they're going to see, they're going to look anywhere on that resume, they meaning HR folks, they're going to look anywhere on that resume to make sure that you meet the qualifications, and wherever they find it is where they find it. But just keep everything neat and understandable and non-chaotic, right? As long as it's not chaos, it doesn't matter the order necessarily. Is there anything I should do differently being a creative professional? My resume includes a good amount of experience spanning a wide range of skill sets. However, I'm never even considered for an interview. Okay. Well, I'm sorry that you've been having such a hard time getting considered for an interview. I think if you follow the process that I described today, where you're focusing to the extent that you can, right, on the knowledge, skills, and abilities described in the announcement, as long as you're speaking to those skill sets in some way, even if you have to be a little bit creative on how you show that. I'm not talking about embellishing, right? I'm not talking about saying that you've done things that you haven't. But there are ways that you can look at particular skill sets on the posting, and you can craft it in a way based on your prior experience where you can show the connection, right? So try to always show the connection with regard to the duty section, the qualifications section, and the things that you see on that occupational questionnaire, and see if it makes a difference. In other words, rather than just state your creative experiences in the past, link them to the duties, the qualifications, and the occupational series, the occupational questionnaire, and I think that would get you a lot closer to the mark. Try that and see how that works out. Okay. How would 15 years of self-employment be verified? That's a good question. I'm not quite sure how the investigators look into that. It may be a phone call to you, right? Or maybe it could be to some of your clients. Because what will happen is that when you apply, when you are selected, tentatively selected for a job, that kicks off the background investigation slash what is this called? Oh boy, the term eludes me at the moment. Everyone's going to get a background investigation done, but they may also do an additional security clearance. That's what I'm looking for. Okay. So depending on the type of job for which you're applying and the nature of the work, it may be they go back just a few years, and maybe they go back 20 years, right? And they're going to ask different things. And one of the things they'll look into your professional life, they'll also look into your personal life. So what they might do is they might ask you in terms of your personal life for the name and addresses of a couple of neighbors where you lived in the last 10 years. But they're going to look, in my experience, what they'll do is they'll contact those neighbors, but then they'll ask those neighbors for additional contacts, right? And you might have a similar situation when it comes to employers, right? So they have creative ways. These people are very good at their job. They have ways in which they can do this. They may contact you to get the main information, but they may wind up asking for some of your clients, right? To verify that you've actually been a client, that you actually had clients. So, I don't want to speak to their processes per se, but my main point is that they're very good at their job. So just get it down, and I promise you that they'll find a way to verify it. Let's see here. Does verification involve contacting employers that you currently are working? I would rather not alert my employer that I'm seeking employment elsewhere if possible. I'm pretty sure that when you're doing the resume builder, they ask you if you would like to. It's been a while since I look at all the details, but I'm pretty sure they ask if they can contact your present employer, and then you could say yes or no. At some point, they're going to have to do that, right? If you're in serious contention, but I believe that you can tell them to hold off on that for as long as it's necessary. And what you can do is in the body of your resume, just put that in parentheses, right? Give them the employer information, but say just be upfront and say I'd rather that my supervisor not be contacted until the last possible moment. Because at some point they will have to do that, right? Because they're going to have to verify that. But usually that takes place once you're towards the very end of the process. So just be clear about that you'd prefer that doesn't happen until as late as possible. Why are job submissions untouched for so long? I'm currently receiving rejection notices from jobs I applied for a year ago. Okay, well, I don't know how common it is to be waiting a year. I'm not saying that that's not happening, so please don't misunderstand me. I totally believe you, right? the pandemic year has been tough for everybody, right? So it's very possible that they just have not been able to get to that job, to hiring for that job until now. And you may very well have applied a year ago. So the pandemic has been unusual in many different ways, up to and including the hiring process. Okay, so that may be part of the explanation there. We OPM, we try to work with the agencies to encourage them to, from the time that they post an announcement to the time that they hire someone, to shorten that gap as much as possible. But it really depends on so many different factors how quickly that happens. For example, if and people want to know this all the time, how long will it take to actually hire somebody? Well, it really, I know people hate that answer, but it really does depend. You know, if the agency's hiring for a job for which people can meet the qualifications essentially at the drop of a hat, they're probably going to fill that position pretty quickly. But what about if it's a position that is considered to be a hard to fill position because of a really high level requirement, right? Or a particular skill set that's rare out there, you know, or something that requires a very high degree of licensure or something to that degree, right? So there may be all kinds of reasons why it may take longer for you to hire a nuclear physicist than it might take you to hire a clerk, right? And I'm not speaking to the value of those positions, okay? So I don't mean to imply that a clerk is any less than a nuclear physicist, but just from a strict point of view of KSAs, it's going to be a lot harder to get a nuclear physicist, right? And I promise you, you want the agency to take as much time as they need to get a nuclear physicist, right? They're not to hire someone rashly. So it's going to be all over the place. So there could be a lot of reasons. It could be the qualifications for the job, how long it takes to find people that are, you know, that have those skill sets, you know, whether the agency has the budget to hire right now. Maybe at the time that they put out the posting, their budget was just fine. And all of a sudden they got a new mandate that all of a sudden threw their budget into turmoil and now they have to wait. There are all kinds of reasons why positions may take longer to hire. So please don't assume that it has anything to do with something you did wrong or something that, you know, the agency is trying to be, you know, coy about it. It's not that. There's just so many different factors that can take place there. And I know it can be frustrating, but stay with it. It's worth it. Let's see here. Okay. Would you know if working for years as a federal contractor would count towards GS experience? If so, how would you calculate a GS level? That's a great question. So the direct answer is no. Your federal contractor experience does not count towards GS level work, towards a particular GS job, in the sense that it's not considered quote unquote federal work for purposes of considering you a federal employee. So I want to describe this carefully. So you're not considered a federal employee. Like if you're applying for a job that is only open to federal employees, you cannot apply for that job, because if you're a federal contractor, even for 10 years, none of that is considered quote unquote federal work, even though you've been working for a federal agency, because federal work means that you had a specific federal appointment, which is different than just working for the federal government, right? I know it's a little bit confusing, but you'd be considered an outside person as if you're working in any private sector job. However, the level of work that you've been doing may very well equate to the level that's reflected for that GS experience. GS stands for general schedule. It's one of the more common pay scales that you have when you're applying for federal work. So the way you do that is, how would you determine the level that you're doing? Well, if the kind of work that you've been doing is materially similar to the job for which you're applying, then when you look at the posting, you're typically going to have the money listed, the compensation listed two different ways. It'll usually listed as GS, and it'll as a GS pay range, and it'll list it as a range of an actual dollar range, right? So that, because it assumes that people who've never been in the federal government before don't know what the GS level is. So you're going to go based upon the range of the salary that's listed there. So if you're looking at the job and you're saying, boy, I've done all this stuff here, I really think I clearly meet this, look at the salary range. Does the salary range compare to what other people who are doing similar work in the private sector are getting? So if you ask yourself, if I were doing this job not as a federal contractor, but if I were doing this job in, in company X that does similar type of work, what would those folks be getting paid? What's the comparability? If they'd be making $40,000, then chances are that's what I would be making as well, right? If I were working out there as compared to the federal government. So then you can look at that posting and say, okay, this is within the range that makes sense to me. And by the way, you can always tell what the salary range is for GS, but you could do a public search just on Google or whatever, right? You can type in there GS pay schedule 2021, and you could find exactly in every region, you can find exactly what that pay is. So that way you can get a sense, okay, based on what I know of this field, I know that my peers in other companies are making 50,000, 60, 70. And then you go into the GS scale, say, okay, so I should be roughly around here, right? It definitely wouldn't be GS2. It'd probably be up around GS5, GS7, GS8, 9, around there. Okay, so I wish I can get deeper into that, but that's about the best I can do in a couple of minutes here. Okay, I think I have time maybe for one more question. So many questions that are coming in, and I apologize that I can't get to them all. Should I apply to multiple grade levels, or is it redundant and will aggravate the hiring manager? Oh, no, please do not worry about aggravating the hiring manager. You apply to as many things as you think you qualify for. But if you apply for a job title that is listed with multiple grade levels, you want to make sure that you indicate that you want to be considered for every single grade level that you want to be considered. They're not going to assume that because, let's say you're applying for a 7, 9, 11, and let's say you qualify for all three. You don't say GS11 and then assume that they're going to also consider you for the 9 and 7 because, hey, if I qualify for the 11, then they'll know that I qualify for the 9 and 7 too. They're not going to assume that you want to be considered for all three. You have to specifically say 11, 9, and 7 and answer the questions for every one of those levels. Okay. All right. A lot of great questions. Like I said, if you could always attend the second session like this. We advertise more on USA Jobs, and you can always apply for a refresher and get those questions answered. You could also send them to outreach@opm.gov. And I hope that you continue to follow up and do a great job in your resume. And I promise you that doing a really thorough job like this is going to greatly increase your chances of being considered for something. So thank you, everybody, for your patience. Thank you for taking the time to be here and for asking all these great questions. And I hope that this has been beneficial for you. Take care, everyone, and have a great remainder of your day. Bye-bye.